All right, so we are continuing on today with part two of section one. So we're going to start with California reigniting the slavery debate. And so, for a time after the Missouri Compromise, both slave and free states would enter the Union very peacefully. When California, though, requested admission to the Union as a free state in 1850, the balance of power in the Senate was once again threatened by this. And, well, in 1849, there were 15 slave states and 15 free states, and admitting California as a free state would upset that balance and make it 16-15, or 15-16, respectively. It also seemed possible that Oregon, Utah, and New Mexico might also join as free states. Now, if California joins as a free state, making it 16 free states, and then those three as well, all of a sudden it's a 19-15 balance. And that's not going to go very well for the South. And so many Southerners will fear that the South would be hopelessly outvoted in the Senate because of this. It would give the Northern free states a huge, huge advantage over the Southerners in the Senate. And some even suggested that Southern states might want to secede or remove themselves from the U.S. as a result of adding all these free states. However, Northern congressmen will argue that California should enter the Union as a free state since most of it lay north of the Missouri Compromise line. That's going back to the imaginary line drawn yesterday. And so a crisis will be beginning or will start to brew here in the United States as a result of this. So Henry Clay and John Calhoun, huge, huge Americans in the Senate, and they're going to spend a lot of time arguing with each other about what's the best route to take. So Henry Clay knew that a compromise with the free and slave state admittance needed to be reached. So Clay's a realist. He's like, all right, guys, we have to have some kind of compromise, otherwise the whole United States is going to fall apart. Calhoun, though, will want to allow slavery in the western states. So he's going to be pushing very heavily to influence this outcome for the western states. He also demanded that fugitives or African Americans who had fled slavery be returned to their owners. And he wanted Northerners to admit that slaveholders had a right to reclaim their quote unquote property. Now, this part was really dangerous because by making them admit that they were retaining their property or reclaiming their property, you're saying that African Americans are no longer people, but they're property. And so it's kind of a big sticking point for the Northerners. So the Northerners won't like that part at all. So Clay's sitting there saying, well, we need some kind of compromise. And basically, Calhoun's like, no, we really don't. This is how it should be. And so it's going to be up to Daniel Webster who's going to offer a compromise. Webster opposed the concept of states' rights, which remember that's where states have a little bit more power than the government. And he believed that a union or in a union, the federal authority was supreme. In other words, the federal government is the supreme government. Nobody can go over top of the federal government. And he feared that the states could not separate without suffering a bloody civil war. So, 11 years before the Civil War actually breaks out, Webster is going to be predicting that should a separation of states start dividing the United States, that a very bloody civil war will break out. And he's not wrong when that actually does happen. A civil war, though, is a war between people of the same country. He also felt that slavery was evil, but he felt that the breakup of the United States would be worse, and so he would have to create a compromise. So, although Webster doesn't like slavery necessarily, he's still going to have to come up with some idea to compromise between both sides to prevent the nation from tearing itself apart. And so in 1850, as the debate rages on, both Calhoun and President Taylor will pass away. The new president was Millard Fillmore, and unlike Taylor, he encouraged Clay to seek a compromise. So Millard Fillmore becomes president after Taylor dies, and he's going to work on trying to get there to be some kind of compromise between the two sides on the slavery issue. And so this is where we're going to come up with the Compromise of 1850. So Henry Clay will give more than 70 speeches in favor of a compromise and would finally propose the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 will have five main provisions. I also have a video that I will link in the description of this for you guys to watch about the Compromise of 1850. First, it allowed California to enter the Union as a free state. Cool. California will now enter the Union and become a state, making it 16 free states and 15 slave states. So now the free states have a slight advantage in the Senate over the slave states. Second, it will divide the rest of the Mexican cession, so all those territories we gained from the Mexican-American War, into the territories of New Mexico and Utah, where voters in the states would decide the slavery question. Now, basically, they're going to leave it up to popular sovereignty, like we talked about yesterday. So if you're a state in those territories, then, well, you have a chance of basically becoming a slave or a free state. Third, it will end the slave trade in Washington, D.C., but Congress said that it doesn't have the power to ban the slave trade between slave states. So, sorry. Um, while slave trade will be banned in Washington, D.C., it can still exist between states because Congress didn't really feel they had the authority to ban it on those grounds. Fourth, it included a strict fugitive slave law, which we will talk about on the next slide. And fifth, it settled a border dispute between Texas and New Mexico. So it did do quite a bit, but it's going to create a lot of controversy, especially with that fourth point with the fugitive slave law. We're going to delve a little bit more into that now. So the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 replaced the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, which slave owners believed was too weak to begin with. And under the 1793 law, many Northerners had refused to cooperate with slave owners who were trying to capture the escapees and return them to slavery. So the Southerners expected Northerners to basically catch the runaway slaves and send them back to captivity in the South. However, under the 1793 law, there really wasn't a whole lot of punishment. So they would basically just choose to ignore it. However, the new law will require all citizens to help catch African Americans by trying to escape slavery. And so now they're going to enact actually a big penalty for this. And so you could either be fined up to $1,000, which is a huge amount of money back then, or be put in jail. So there's actually now a punishment with the Fugitive Slave Act for failure to try to catch escaped slaves. The Fugitive Slave Act also set up special courts to handle the cases of runaways. And this will be really controversial because suspects were not allowed a jury trial, and judges would receive $10 for sending an accused runaway to slavery, but only $5 for setting someone free. So if that judge wasn't really an honest person, well, he's going to do what's best for him. He's going to take that $10 and send them back to slavery, even if they're not even a slave to begin with. Now, Northerners are going to get very angry over this, and the Compromise of 1850 will have um, the effect of holding the Union together for a little while longer, but it's only going to last for about 10, 11 years. And the conflict between North and South over the issue of slavery and its expansion remained, and many in the North and in the South were not satisfied with the compromise at all. Anti-slavery Northerners were particularly angry about the Fugitive Slave Act by forcing them to catch runaways, and the law made Northerners part of the slave system now even more than they already were indirectly, which we've talked about in the past. To counter the Fugitive Slave Act, many northern states passed personal liberty laws, and these laws made it harder to recapture those accused of running away. So basically, the North, in order to counter this Fugitive Slave Act and basically annul it, they're going to pass their own laws that really kind of allow the Northerners to ignore the Fugitive Slave Act. And so the whole thing will come to a big head in the North with the writing of Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852. The novel shows the evils of slavery and the injustices of the Fugitive Slave Act. So Stowe will tell the story of Uncle Tom, who's an enslaved African American known for his kindness and piety. So he's kind of religious and he's a very kind individual. Tom is bought by a brutal plantation owner and whipped to death, though, by that owner when he refuses to reveal the location of two runaway slaves. Now, this makes slavery look really, really bad, especially in the North, where people really don't have a generally good idea about what actually occurs on a plantation on a regular basis. The novel will quickly become a bestseller, though. And the first printing of 5,000 copies will sell out in 2 days. So Harriet Beecher Stowe sold 5,000 copies of this book in 2 days. And in the first year, it would sell 300,000 copies, and eventually it will be printed in 12 languages and sold all around the world. So it's going to become a very popular book. Although Uncle Tom's Cabin was popular in the North, Southerners would object to it. They claimed that it did not give a true picture of slave life and did not show the good side of slavery. Um, which it really didn't. They kind of Uncle Tom's Cabin basically portrays it in one of the most evil ways possible. And despite such objections from the South, Uncle Tom's Cabin will help change the way Northerners felt about slavery now. And no longer could Northerners ignore slavery as a political problem for Congress to settle. Now people are going to feel like it's their job to settle this issue. So more and more Northerners now saw slavery as a moral problem facing every American now, and not just the South. And for this reason, Uncle Tom's Cabin was one of the most important books in American history. Now, this is the end of section one. Tomorrow, your assignment is to read an outline or do your 2 column notes for lesson two to get ready for Friday's class. And also, today, after these notes, make sure you take the online book quiz because a lot of your grades aren't great right now. And make sure you're using your notes when you're taking those quizzes because some of you guys need to bump your grades up a little bit more. Once again, if you have any questions, please get in touch with me, whether it's through Zoom, which is posted on my contact information page every day for the Zoom code, or send me an email. So if you have any questions, please get in touch with me. Have a good day.